Within the sprawling subterranean city of Menzoberranzan, a Drow merchant strode purposefully through the darkened streets, the faint glow of phosphorescent fungi casting ghostly shadows on the polished obsidian walls. The city thrummed with activity as Drow nobles, commoners, and slaves moved about their business under the ever-watchful eyes of the ruling houses. Spiders, small, venomous, and sacred to Lolth, scuttled freely across the streets and walls, their presence a constant reminder of the Spider Queen's influence. Our Drow, known as Kaldin, a gloomstalker by trade and necessity, led 2 slaves behind him, their chains rattling softly against the stone floor. The first, a young female gnome, her wide eyes darting nervously at every shadow, and the other, an older male gnome, his once proud demeanour now reduced to quiet resignation. The pair struggled to keep pace, their small frames no match for the Drow's brisk stride. They made their way toward the opulent halls of House Benray, the most powerful noble house in Menzoberranzan. The structure loomed above the rest of the city, its spires carved to resemble the legs of an immense spider. Inside, the atmosphere was oppressive, the air thick with the scent of incense and the faint metallic tang of blood. The walls were adorned with intricate carvings of spider webs and depictions of Lolth, her many eyes seeming to follow every movement. Tiny spiders crawled freely over these depictions, their skittering legs adding an unsettling undertone to the murmur of voices echoing through the hall. Kaldin approached a group of black-armoured figures bearing the insignia of the Black Claw Mercantile Company, a powerful organisation known for its trade in rare and illicit goods, including slaves. The company's emblem, a spider's claw clutching a gemstone, glinted ominously in the dim light. One of the merchants stepped forward, a tall, stern-faced Drow whose crimson eyes betrayed no emotion. "You have brought the merchandise?" the merchant asked, his voice smooth and cold. "As agreed," replied the Gloomstalker, gesturing to the gnomes. 2 skilled artisans. The male has experience with intricate mechanisms, and the female possesses an aptitude for gem cutting. Both are unspoiled by surface dwellers' ideals. The merchant inspected the gnomes with a critical eye, lifting their chins with a gloved hand. After a moment, he nodded. "Acceptable. Payment will be transferred immediately." As the transaction concluded, Kaldin's attention was drawn to the throne room, visible beyond a set of intricately wrought iron doors. The centerpiece of the room was a massive throne forged from adamantine and shaped into the likeness of a spider. Its many legs curled menacingly around the dais, and its abdomen gleamed with embedded rubies. Even from a distance, the throne exuded an aura of power and danger, a fitting seat for the matron mother of House Benray. Before he could linger further, a pair of nobles approached, their robes shimmering with enchantments. One of them, a tall female with an air of arrogance, addressed him directly. "You there. The Black Claw has reported disruptions in their mining operations. Slaves skilled in the extraction of adamantine and mithril have gone missing near the lower dark tunnels. You will investigate this matter." The Gloomstalker inclined his head respectfully. "As you command." Leaving the halls of House Benray, he made his way through the bustling markets of Menzoberranzan. The streets were alive with activity, vendors hawking everything from rare poisons to enchanted weapons. Creatures of the Underdark, Duergar, Sverfneblin, and even the occasional mind flayer mingled among the Drow, their interactions tense but mutually beneficial. He paused at a familiar tavern, a shadowy establishment tucked into the corner of the market district. Inside, his companions awaited him, seated around a low table and speaking in hushed tones. As he entered, the tavern owner, an older Drow with a scar running down one cheek, caught his arm. "A gift," the owner said, pressing a small sending stone into his hand. "In case you need to relay information quickly." The Gloomstalker nodded his thanks and joined his companions. As they discussed the mission, the group's diverse skills became apparent, a deadly mix of swordsmen, archers, and mages. Chaldean laid out the details of their task, emphasizing the dangers of the lower dark and the potential for encountering powerful creatures. "This won't be easy," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The lower dark is no place for mistakes. Stay sharp, and remember, trust no one and nothing." With their preparations complete, the group set off, the shadowy streets of Menzoberranzan fading behind them as they ascended toward the tunnels leading to the depths of the Underdark. The descent into the Underdark's labyrinthine tunnels was marked by an immediate shift in atmosphere. The oppressive presence of the city's rulers faded, replaced by the eerie stillness of ancient caverns. The group moved with practiced precision, their footfalls almost silent against the uneven stone floor. Phosphorescent fungi dotted the walls and ceilings, casting pale green and blue light that illuminated the jagged rock formations. As they journeyed deeper, the Drow began to take note of their surroundings. Massive mushrooms, some towering as high as trees, loomed over their path, their caps glowing faintly. The air was damp and cool, carrying the faint smell of decay mixed with the earthy scent of fungi. Streams of water trickled through the caverns, carving intricate patterns into the stone over millennia. The Gloomstalker led the group, his keen eyes scanning for signs of danger. He occasionally paused to inspect the ground or examine markings on the cavern walls, his expertise in tracking evident. The group's archers, two lithe drow with matching obsidian bows, kept a vigilant watch on the flanks, while the mages walked near the center, their hands occasionally glowing with faint magical energy as they prepared defensive wards. As they walked, the Gloomstalker spoke in hushed tones, sharing his knowledge of the Underdark's dangers. "These tunnels are treacherous," he said, "not just because of the creatures that dwell here, but because the very environment can deceive you. The light you see might lead to safety or into the maw of a predator." One of the mages, a sharp-eyed female with an aura of quiet authority, added, "The Underdark changes. Tunnels collapse and new paths open. Maps are only so reliable. Stay close and keep your wits about you." They passed by a series of carvings etched into the cavern walls, ancient symbols whose meanings were long lost to time. The Gloomstalker paused briefly, running his fingers over the markings. "This was once a Duergar outpost," he said, "abandoned, judging by the wear, but we should remain cautious." Further along, the group encountered a large chamber filled with towering stalagmites and stalactites that formed natural columns. The air was alive with the sound of dripping water, and faint whispers seemed to echo through the cavern. One of the archers shivered. "This place feels wrong," she muttered. The Gloomstalker nodded. "The Underdark often does. Keep your weapons ready." As they pressed on, the group came across a narrow bridge spanning a deep chasm. The bridge was made of natural stone, its surface slick with moisture. Below, the faint sound of rushing water hinted at an underground river. One by one, they crossed, their movements slow and deliberate. The Gloomstalker went last, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness for any signs of movement. After several hours of travel, they stopped to rest in a small alcove. The mages conjured faint, heatless flames to provide light without attracting attention, and the group shared a sparse meal of dried mushrooms. Conversation was minimal, each drow lost in their own thoughts about the dangers ahead. The Gloomstalker took a moment to reflect on their mission. The missing slaves, the rumors of powerful creatures, the orders from the nobles, it all felt interconnected, part of a larger web of intrigue. As he looked at his companions, he silently vowed to see the mission through no matter the cost. As they continued, the tunnel widened and the faint sound of rushing water grew louder. They approached a subterranean lake, the surface shimmering with an unnatural, iridescent glow. Before they could consider the beauty of the scene, shadows flitted across the far end of the cavern. A moment later, a band of duergar emerged, their eyes gleaming with malice. The fight erupts with brutal efficiency. The dual-bladed drow moves first, his swords flashing in the dim light as he engages the front line of duergar. His movements are a deadly dance, with each strike precise, and each step calculated to funnel the attackers into a narrow corridor where they can be more easily controlled. The archers split off, flanking the enemy and sending arrows raining down from the shadows. Our drow ranger melted into the darkness, his connection to the Shadowfell allowing him to teleport between patches of shadow. From his concealed vantage points, he picked off targets with lethal accuracy, each arrow finding a gap in the duergar's armor. The enemy, though fierce, was outmaneuvered. But the battle takes its toll. 2 of the companions fall, their lifeblood staining the cavern floor. The survivors pause only long enough to honor their fallen. Our drow ranger whispered a prayer to Lolth, folding their arms across their chests and laying their weapons atop their bodies. "May your souls find favor with the Spider Queen," he intoned. With heavy hearts, the group boards a crude duergar boat to cross the lake. The vessel creaks ominously, but it holds as they row toward the next leg of their journey. The water is eerily calm, the surface reflecting the glow of the cavern ceiling like a distorted mirror. As they drift further into the darkness, the sense of unease grows, the silence pressing down on them like a physical weight. The boat continues to glide through vast, slimy caverns, the air thick with moisture and a faint, supernatural hum. The walls glisten with an unidentifiable substance, and strange, bioluminescent creatures dart beneath the water's surface. The ranger studies a bestiary, recounting the Aboleth's psionic powers and the illusory magic that distorts reality. "Stay vigilant," he warns, his voice low but commanding. As the group settled into the vessel, a quiet tension filled the air. Caldine sat at the helm, studying his companion's expressions. The waterways stretched ahead, dimly lit by bioluminescent fungi lining the cavern walls, casting eerie shadows on the boat. One of the companions, a wiry drow with streaks of silver in his hair, broke the silence. "This isn't just about the miners, is it?" he asked, his voice low and edged with suspicion. "You've got something personal against the Aboleths." Caldine glanced at him, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Personal, that's one way to put it," he replied. "Aboleths are the architects of chaos in the Underdark. Their psionic whispers seep into every crevice, corrupting alliances, sowing discord, and turning kin against one another." Another drow, a younger woman with twin scimitars strapped to her back, leaned forward. "What did they do to you?" she asked, her tone genuinely curious. "They destroyed my family," he said flatly, the words heavy with restrained anger. "Years ago, one of them infiltrated my house. It didn't use brute force. It didn't need to. It whispered into the minds of my parents, planting seeds of paranoia. They turned on each other, suspecting betrayal where there was none. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. My house was in ruins, and the Aboleth had vanished into the depths, leaving only echoes of its vile influence." The boat rocked slightly as the party absorbed his words. The older drow nodded grimly. "They don't just kill, they unmake." "Exactly," the Gloomstalker said. "Fighting them isn't just about steel and spells. It's about resisting their control. They'll try to twist your thoughts, make you doubt yourself, your allies. Stay grounded. Trust in your training and in each other." The younger drow tilted her head. "And what about their physical form? They're ancient and powerful," he explained. "Their minds are their greatest weapon, but their bodies are formidable too. Slippery, resilient. Aim for their sensory nodes, those glowing eyes. It disrupts their focus." The older drow chuckled dryly. Easier said than done, when your mind is being peeled apart. True, he admitted. But that's why we stay vigilant. They'll use illusions, false realities to disorient us. Keep questioning what you see and feel. That's the only way to stay ahead of them. As the boat glided forward, the companions exchanged determined glances. They were ready, or as ready as one could be when facing an Aboleth. As they near a large cavern, stalactites hung ominously from above. The ranger's sharp eyes detected movement among them. Piercers, predatory creatures, detached and plummeted toward the boat. Chaos erupted as they crashed onto the vessel, punching holes in its hull. The Drow scramble, quickly moving, and the remaining companions swim to a narrow shore, escaping the sinking craft. Soaked and on edge, they press forward. Chaldean knew that on the edge of the path toward the mining operation lay the Aboleth city of Dupapan. Accounts from captured slaves spoke of scum patrolling its outskirts and driving enslaved miners into the deep mithril pits. These pits, filled with water and vast wealth, were critical to the Aboleth's trade network. Magical items crafted by these enslaved artisans found their way into the hands of scum and rival Underdark factions. It was a network built on suffering. The party approached the city under the cover of invisibility, their forms blending seamlessly into the shadows. The Gloomstalker led the way, his keen eyes scanning the dimly lit expanse. The cavern was vast, its walls covered in a slick, glistening substance that pulsed faintly with a magical glow. In the distance, they spotted the edges of a pool, where an Aboleth basked in the murky waters, its massive form undulating slightly. Beside it knelt a kobold, its small frame trembling as it muttered prayers to the creature. The Gloomstalker held up a hand, signaling the group to stop. He crouched low, observing the scene. "We'll need to restrain them quickly," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The kobold might have useful information. The younger Drow nodded, her scimitars already in her hands. "What about the Aboleth?" "It's a risk," he admitted, "but we can't let it alert the others. We'll need to act decisively." The party spread out, taking positions around the pool. One of the Drow climbed silently to a ledge overlooking the water, her weapon drawn and aimed. Another Drow moved into the shadows, ready to strike from behind. The Gloomstalker signaled, and the ambush began. The Drow on the ledge leaped, her dual swords aimed at the Aboleth's neck. But as she descended, her blades passed through empty air. The Aboleth shimmered, revealing itself to be an illusion. The Drow crashed into the pool below, the water enveloping her with an unnatural silence. Before anyone could react, the real Aboleth surfaced with a thunderous roar, its tentacles lashing out. One Drow was caught mid-step, flung into the cavern wall with a sickening crunch. Another managed to dodge, only to be struck by a psionic wave that sent him reeling. The Gloomstalker gritted his teeth, his mind bombarded with alien thoughts. The Aboleth's voice slithered into his consciousness, promising power, revenge, and freedom from his pain. He staggered, his vision blurring, but he forced himself to focus, drawing on his training and his connection to the Shadowfell. The shadows around him seemed to ripple in response, wrapping around him like a protective shroud. "Enough of this," he growled, disappearing into the darkness. Reappearing behind the Aboleth, he drove one blade into its flank. The creature roared, turning to strike, but he was already gone, darting between shadows with an almost supernatural grace. Meanwhile, the younger Drow engaged the kobold, disarming it with a swift strike. She pinned it to the ground, her blade at its throat. "Where are the miners?" she demanded. The kobold whimpered, its eyes darting to the Aboleth. "They are below," it stammered, "in the pits." but you'll never save them. The Aboleth, sensing its servant's betrayal, lashed out with a tentacle, striking the kobold and sending it flying into the water. The younger Drow barely managed to dodge the attack, retreating to regroup. The battle intensified, with the Aboleth's psionic attacks and physical strikes pushing the Drow to their limits. But the Gloomstalker's relentless assaults began to take their toll. With each strike, he targeted the creature's sensory nodes, disrupting its focus and weakening its attacks. Finally, with a coordinated effort, the remaining Drow overwhelmed the Aboleth. The Gloomstalker delivered the killing blow, his blade piercing its central eye. The creature let out a final ear-piercing wail before collapsing into the pool, its body sinking into the depths. Breathing heavily, the Drow gathered near the water's edge. The Gloomstalker retrieved the sending stone, his voice steady despite the exhaustion. "The miners are below," he said, "and the plot goes deeper than we thought. House Benare must be prepared." As the message was sent, the cavern began to tremble, the walls cracking ominously. "We're not done yet," he said, rallying his companions. "Let's finish this." With the fall of the Aboleth's fleshy body into the water, the echoes of its psionic power lingered in the cavern, like a fading melody of madness. But the Drow barely had time to catch their breath before the environment began to shift. The hum of the cavern grew louder, reverberating through the stone like a heartbeat. "They know," Kaldin muttered, gripping his dual blades tightly. "More are coming." As if in response, the water shimmered unnaturally, rippling with an ominous light. From the depths, another Aboleth surfaced, its massive form radiating an aura of dread. Around it swam a host of scum, their pallid forms glistening as they emerged onto the rocky shore. "Prepare yourselves," he commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos. The battle erupted with terrifying speed. The Aboleth unleashed a wave of psionic energy, a mental barrage that struck the minds of the Drow like a tidal wave. Our Drow staggered, his vision swimming as alien thoughts clawed at the edges of his consciousness. Images of betrayal, doubt, and despair flickered before his eyes. He clenched his jaw, focusing on the amulet of Lolth around his neck, drawing strength from his goddess. "Resist it!" he shouted, shaking off the invasive thoughts. "It's trying to break us!" The Aboleth, sensing his defiance, turned its attention to him. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and his surroundings shifted. Suddenly he was no longer in the cavern but back in his family's estate, the screams of his parents echoing around him. "No," he whispered, clutching his head. "This isn't real." A sharp pain in his shoulder brought him back to reality. The younger Drow had struck him lightly, her eyes blazing. "Focus! We need you!" He nodded, shaking off the illusion, and leaped into action. Drawing on his connection to the Shadowfell, he vanished into the shadows, reappearing behind a cluster of scum. His blades danced through the air, a blur of lethal precision. Meanwhile, the other Drow fought valiantly. The older Drow unleashed a barrage of dark spells, tendrils of shadow wrapping around their enemies. The younger Drow weaved through the chaos, her scimitars flashing as she cut down scum with ruthless efficiency. But the Aboleth was far from defeated. It lashed out with its tentacles, striking with devastating force. One Drow was thrown against the cavern wall, crumpling to the ground. Another was dragged into the water, vanishing beneath the surface. Our Drow, seeing his companions falter, unleashed a desperate strategy. He teleported directly onto the Aboleth's back, plunging his blades into its flesh. The creature roared, its psionic scream reverberating through his mind. He gritted his teeth, focusing on his willpower to resist the overwhelming charm. "You'll not take me," he growled, driving his blades deeper. The Aboleth thrashed, trying to dislodge him. Its thoughts invaded his mind, whispering promises of power, of vengeance against his enemies. For a moment he hesitated, his grip faltering, but then he remembered his family, the destruction wrought by creatures like this one. "Your lies won't work on me," he spat, and with a final surge of strength, he drove his blades into the creature's sensory nodes. The Aboleth let out a deafening wail, its body convulsing violently before collapsing into the water. Around it, the remaining scum fell, their connection severed. The cavern fell silent once more, save for the laboured breaths of the surviving Drow. Exhausted but triumphant, our Drow retrieved the sending stone. "To the tavern," he whispered. "Tell them the plot is deeper than we thought. House Banri must be ready." As he ended the message, the cavern began to tremble, the walls cracking ominously. "We're not safe yet," he said, rallying his remaining companions. Together, they prepared for one final stand.